The blood-red horizon swallowed the dying sun as Catherine Porter stood at the edge of her family's burned-out homestead, clutching the only possession she had left, her mother's silver locket. Texas, 1875, was no place for a woman alone, but here she was, 22 years old with nothing but ashes and broken promises surrounding her. The rattling of wagon wheels pulled Catherine from her thoughts. Instinctively, she reached for the small derringer hidden in the folds of her skirt, a gift from her father before the fever took him last spring. Her mother had followed him to the grave just 2 months past, leaving Catherine to tend their small ranch alone. But now, even that was gone. "Whoa there!" a deep voice called out as a wagon appeared around the bend. The driver, a broad-shouldered man with sun-bronzed skin, pulled his team to a halt several yards away. His eyes, startlingly blue against his weathered face, widened at the sight of the charred remains of the Porter cabin. "Miss, you all right?" he asked, removing his hat to reveal dark brown hair that curled slightly at the temples. He couldn't have been more than 30, with a strong jawline partially hidden beneath a week-old beard. "Do I look all right to you?" Catherine snapped, her voice breaking despite her attempt at strength. She'd been holding herself together for 3 days now, ever since the Blackwell gang had raided her home, taking everything of value and burning what they couldn't carry. The stranger stepped down from his wagon, approaching slowly like one might a spooked horse. "Name's Matthew Keller," he said, keeping a respectful distance. "I was heading to Willow Creek when I saw the smoke, thought someone might need help. You're 3 days too late, mister." "Keller," Catherine said, turning back to the ruins. The lump in her throat threatened to choke her as tears welled in her eyes. She fought to hold them back. Tears wouldn't rebuild her home or bring back what she'd lost. Matthew observed the destruction, his expression hardening. "Blackwell's?" he asked quietly. Catherine's head snapped toward him. "How did you? They've been terrorizing this part of Texas for months now," he sighed, replacing his hat. "I'm sorry for your trouble, Miss Porter." "Catherine Porter," Matthew nodded, eyes scanning the horizon. "It'll be dark soon." "You got somewhere to go, Miss Porter?" The question hung in the air between them. Catherine had nowhere. Her nearest neighbors were 20 miles east, and her only remaining family, an aunt she'd never met, lived in San Francisco. She'd been planning to sleep in the root cellar which had somehow survived the fire. "I'll manage," she replied stiffly. Matthew Keller's jaw tightened. He glanced at his wagon, then back at her. "There's a town about 10 miles west, Salvation. Small place, but there's an inn. I'm heading that way before continuing to Willow Creek." "I don't accept charity, Mr. Keller." A small smile played at the corner of his mouth. "Didn't offer any, but I do offer safe passage to town. After that, you're on your own." Catherine weighed her options. Night was coming, and with it, the coyotes, both the four-legged kind and the human predators that prowled these parts. Pride wouldn't keep her warm or safe. "Very well," she conceded. "To Salvation." Matthew helped her into the wagon, his calloused hands gentle but strong. As they pulled away, Catherine couldn't bear to look back at what remained of her life. Instead, she fixed her gaze forward, fighting the tears that threatened to spill down her cheeks. "It's all right to cry, you know," Matthew said softly, eyes on the trail ahead. "Out here, only the land remembers your tears." "I've done enough crying," Catherine responded, her voice barely above a whisper. They rode in silence as the day surrendered to twilight. The gentle rocking of the wagon and the rhythmic clopping of hooves against hard-packed earth lulled Catherine into a daze. When the wagon hit a deep rut, she jerked awake, realizing she'd dozed against Matthew's shoulder. "Sorry," she mumbled, straightening quickly. "No need," he replied, a kindness in his voice that made her chest ache. When they finally reached Salvation, the small town was mostly dark, with only the saloon and the inn showing signs of life. Matthew pulled up in front of the Wayfarer's Rest, a 2-story building with a sagging porch and windows that glowed with warm lamplight. "Wait here," he said, jumping down. He returned moments later. "They've got a room available." Catherine climbed down, her legs stiff from the long ride. "Thank you for the transport, Mr. Keller." He tipped his hat. "My pleasure, Miss Porter." As she turned to go, the enormity of her situation crashed over her. She had no money, no possessions beyond the clothes on her back and her mother's locket. How would she pay for a room? What would she do come morning? Matthew must have seen something in her face, for his expression softened. "Miss Porter," he began carefully, "I don't mean to pry, but do you have means to pay for lodging?" Catherine's pride warred with practicality. The Blackwells took everything." Matthew nodded as if he'd expected this answer. "I've paid for your room tonight, and I've arranged breakfast for you in the morning. Mr. Keller, I cannot accept. You can and you will," he said firmly. "And tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next." Catherine's eyebrows shot up. "I'm staying in Salvation for a few days before continuing to Willow Creek. Got some business to attend to." His blue eyes held hers. "Unless you'd prefer I move along." The thought of being truly alone again sent a fresh wave of fear through Catherine. "No," she admitted, "I wouldn't." A small smile played at his lips. Then it settled. He reached into his pocket and pressed a key into her palm. "Room 3, top of the stairs. Get some rest, Miss Porter. Tomorrow's a new day." As Matthew walked toward the livery to stable his horses, Catherine watched him go, wondering what kind of man offered help to strangers without expectation of return. In her experience, such men were rare indeed. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a chair by the window that overlooked the town's main street. Catherine washed her face and hands, the cool water a balm to her travel-weary skin. When she laid down, exhaustion claimed her almost immediately, but not before a single tear escaped, tracking silently down her cheek as she surrendered to sleep. Morning came with the sound of roosters crowing and wagons rolling down the street below. Catherine rose, splashed water on her face, and smoothed her wrinkled dress as best she could. Her stomach growled painfully, reminding her that she hadn't eaten properly in days. Downstairs, the inn's small dining room was already busy with travelers and a few locals. Matthew sat at a corner table, nursing a cup of coffee. He stood when he saw her, pulling out a chair. "Morning, Miss Porter. Hope you slept well." "Better than I expected," she admitted, taking the offered seat. "Thank you again for your kindness." A plump woman with graying hair approached their table, setting down plates loaded with eggs, bacon, and biscuits. "Here you are, dears. Coffee." Catherine nodded gratefully, and the woman filled her cup before bustling away to another table. "Mrs. Abernathy owns the inn," Matthew explained. "Best cook in 3 counties, or so they say." Catherine took a bite of the fluffy biscuit and had to agree. For a few minutes they ate in companionable silence. "So," Matthew said finally, "what are your plans now, Miss Porter?" Catherine set down her fork. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "I have an aunt in San Francisco, but I've never met her, and I don't know if she'd welcome me." Matthew nodded thoughtfully. "Train station's in Willow Creek. That's where I'm headed in a few days." "I couldn't impose further. It's no imposition if you're headed the same way," he interrupted gently. "But before we think about San Francisco, have you considered staying in these parts? Starting over?" Catherine frowned. "How? I have nothing." "You have skills, I'd wager. Can you cook, so?" "Yes, but Mrs. Abernathy mentioned she's looking for help," Matthew said, nodding toward the kitchen. "And there's a dress shop in town that might need an extra pair of hands." Catherine stared at him. "Why are you helping me, Mr. Keller? You don't know me." Something flickered in his blue eyes, a shadow of memory, perhaps, or old pain. "Let's just say I know what it's like to lose everything. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to lend a hand." Before Catherine could respond, the inn's front door burst open. 3 men strode in, dust-covered and mean-eyed. The dining room fell silent as they surveyed the room. The tallest of the 3, a man with a jagged scar running from his left eye to his jaw, focused on Matthew. Well, he drawled, "if it ain't Matthew Keller." Matthew's expression remained neutral, but Catherine noticed how his right hand slid beneath the table, likely reaching for a weapon. "Jackson," he acknowledged coolly, "didn't expect to see you in these parts." "Bet you didn't." Jackson's gaze shifted to Catherine, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "And who's this pretty little thing?" Matthew's voice hardened. "A lady who's none of your concern." Jackson laughed, a sound like grinding glass. "Everything in this territory is my concern, Keller, you know that." "What do you want, Jackson?" Matthew asked, his tone flat. "Information," Jackson replied, pulling out an empty chair and spinning it around to straddle it. His companions remained standing, hands hovering near their holstered pistols. "Word is you're looking for the Blackwells." Catherine's breath caught in her throat. Matthew shot her a warning glance. "What makes you think that?" Matthew asked casually. "Little birds sing, Keller." Jackson leaned forward. "Thing is, the Blackwells are my business partners, so you poking around, asking questions, that makes me nervous." "Didn't realize theft and murder were considered business these days," Matthew replied, his voice dangerously soft. Jackson's hand moved to his gun. "Careful now." Mrs. Abernathy appeared behind Jackson, a shotgun in her weathered hands. "Not in my establishment, Jackson. Take your grievances outside or settle them peacefully over breakfast like civilized folk." Jackson's eyes narrowed, but he slowly raised his hands. "No need for that, Mrs. A. We're just having a friendly chat." He stood, adjusting his hat. "We'll be seeing you around, Keller, count on it." His gaze lingered on Catherine. "Both of you." After they left, the dining room gradually returned to its normal buzz of conversation. Catherine released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Who was that?" she asked. Matthew's expression was grim. "Jackson Reeves. Used to ride with the Blackwells before striking out on his own, still does business with them occasionally." "And why does he think you're looking for them?" Matthew hesitated before answering. "Because I am." Catherine's heart skipped. "Why? Same reason you'd want to, I'd wager." He met her gaze steadily. "They killed my brother last year, took everything he had, including his life." Understanding dawned. "You're hunting them." "I prefer to think of it as seeking justice," he corrected. "The law in these parts is spread too thin to do much about gangs like the Blackwells." Catherine's mind raced. "These men, they took everything from me too. Which is why you should stay here in Salvation while I continue to Willow Creek," Matthew said firmly. "It's too dangerous." "No," Catherine replied, surprising herself with her vehemence. "They burned my home, stole my future. I need to see justice done." "Miss Porter," "Catherine," she interrupted, "if we're to be traveling companions, you might as well use my given name." A small smile tugged at the corner of Matthew's mouth. "Catherine, then, and I'm Matthew." "But my point stands. Tracking the Blackwells is dangerous work." "I can handle danger," she insisted, "and I'm a good shot. My father taught me." Matthew studied her for a long moment, seeming to weigh her determination against his better judgment. Finally, he nodded. "All right. But we do this my way. No unnecessary risks." Catherine agreed, feeling a strange mix of fear and resolve settle in her chest. She had nothing left to lose, after all. And perhaps, in helping Matthew find justice for his brother, she might find some peace for herself. That afternoon, Catherine visited the dress shop Matthew had mentioned. The owner, a widow named Mrs. Alina Harrington, was desperate for help and offered Catherine room and board above the shop in exchange for her services. It would only be temporary, Catherine explained. A few weeks at most. Mrs. Harrington smiled warmly. "That suits me fine, dear. My busy season is just starting, what with the harvest festival coming up." Catherine spent the rest of the day helping in the shop, grateful for the distraction of work. When evening fell, she returned to the inn where Matthew waited, a map spread out on the table before him. "The Blackwells were last seen near Eagle Pass," he explained, tracing a route with his finger. "But according to what I heard in town today, they've moved north toward Willow Creek." "Why there?" Catherine asked, studying the map. Railroad payrolls coming through. It'd be a tempting target for men like them. Catherine nodded, the pieces falling into place. "So we go to Willow Creek. When do we leave?" "Day after tomorrow," Matthew replied. "I need to send a telegram first, and you could use another day of rest in preparation." "I don't need," Catherine, Matthew interrupted gently. "What we're doing isn't easy. We're not rushing and half-cocked." She sighed but nodded. "Fine, day after tomorrow." The following day passed in a blur of activity. Catherine worked in Mrs. Harrington's shop, earning enough to buy a sturdy pair of riding boots and a few necessities for the journey. Matthew arranged for horses and supplies, and by evening, everything was ready for their departure. They set out at dawn, the eastern sky painted in pink and gold hues. Catherine rode a chestnut mare named Penny, while Matthew sat atop a powerful black gelding he called Shadow. The road to Willow Creek would take them through rough country hills, streams, and stretches of open prairie where they'd be exposed to both the elements and potentially hostile eyes. As they rode, Catherine found herself studying her companion. Matthew Keller was not what she'd expected when he'd first pulled up to her burned homestead. He was educated, evidenced by his speech, and the book of poetry she'd spotted in his saddlebag. He was kind but carried a hardness in his eyes that spoke of personal loss. And he moved with the confidence of a man who knew how to handle himself in dangerous situations. "You're not just a cowboy, are you?" she asked as they stopped to water the horses at a small creek. Matthew looked up, surprised by the question. "What makes you say that?" "The way you handle yourself, the way Jackson and his men reacted to you, you're something more." A shadow crossed his face. "I was a Texas Ranger for 7 years, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "After Thomas, my brother, was killed, I didn't handle it well. Wanted to go after the Blackwells my own way. My captain disagreed." "So you left the Rangers to hunt them down," Catherine concluded. Matthew nodded. "Not my proudest moment, but I couldn't let it go. Thomas was all the family I had left." Catherine understood that feeling all too well. "I'm sorry about your brother. I'm sorry about your parents and your home." Matthew's blue eyes met hers. "Life has a way of dealing hard blows sometimes." "Yes," Catherine agreed softly. "It does." They continued on, the conversation shifting to lighter topics. Matthew told her about growing up in East Texas, about joining the Rangers after the war, about his brother who'd been a schoolteacher before settling on a small ranch near the border. Catherine shared stories of her childhood in Missouri before her family moved to Texas, seeking better opportunities, about her mother's beautiful singing voice, about her father teaching her to ride and shoot. By the time they made camp that night, a tentative friendship had formed between them, built on shared loss and mutual respect. The following day brought clouds and the threat of rain. They pushed on, hoping to reach Willow Creek before the storm broke. Around midday, Matthew pulled up short, raising a hand for silence. "What is it?" Catherine whispered, immediately alert. Matthew's eyes scanned the ridge ahead. "Riders, 3, maybe 4. Catherine strained to see, but the distant figures were little more than dark smudges against the sky. "Jackson? Maybe," Matthew conceded. "Or it could be ordinary travelers. Either way, let's be careful." They continued at a slower pace, Matthew's hand never straying far from his holstered Colt. As they rounded a bend, the riders came into clearer view. 3 men on horseback, headed straight for them. "Not Jackson," Matthew murmured. "Don't recognize them?" As the riders drew closer, Catherine could make out their features. The leader was an older man with a silver-streaked beard and a weather-beaten face. His companions were younger, possibly in their 30s, with the same hard look of men who spent their lives in the saddle. "Afternoon," the older man called as they approached. "Fine day for traveling." Matthew nodded cautiously. "That it is. You folks headed to Willow Creek?" the man asked, his eyes moving between Matthew and Catherine. "We are," Matthew replied. "What about yourselves coming from there?" The man spat a stream of tobacco juice. "Name's Harlan Peters. These are my sons, James and William." Matthew introduced himself and Catherine, careful not to reveal too much. "How are things in Willow Creek?" "Busy," Peters replied. "Railroads brought in extra men, towns bursting at the seams." He paused, studying Matthew. "You might want to wait a spell before heading in. There's been trouble." Matthew's posture stiffened slightly. "What kind of trouble?" "Blackwell gang hit a supply wagon yesterday," Peters said, shaking his head. "Killed 2 men, town's on edge, marshals are everywhere." Catherine's heart hammered in her chest. The Blackwells were there, just as Matthew had predicted. "Appreciate the warning," Matthew said evenly. Peters nodded. "Safe travels to you both." With that, he and his sons continued on their way. Once they were out of earshot, Catherine turned to Matthew. "They're there in Willow Creek." "So it seems." Matthew's expression was grim. "Which changes things. We can't just ride in now, not with marshals crawling all over the place." "Why not? Wouldn't they help us?" Matthew shook his head. The marshals would ask questions why we're so interested in the Blackwells, what our intentions are. They might even recognize me as a former ranger who left under complicated circumstances. So what do we do? Catherine asked, frustration coloring her voice. Matthew thought for a moment. There's a place about 5 miles from town, an old trapper's cabin. We can stay there, observe from a distance, wait for the right moment. Catherine nodded, though disappointment coursed through her. She'd been hoping for quicker resolution, not more waiting. They altered their route, heading northeast toward the cabin Matthew remembered. The sky darkened further, and by the time they reached the small, weathered structure, rain had begun to fall in earnest. The cabin was primitive but sound, with a small stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, and a single bed frame covered in dusty blankets. Matthew quickly built a fire while Catherine unpacked their supplies. "We'll need to be careful with the smoke," Matthew warned, arranging the wood for minimal output. "Don't want to advertise our presence." Catherine nodded, setting out their meager dinner of jerky, hard biscuits, and dried fruit. As darkness fell, the rain intensified, drumming on the cabin's roof and hissing as it hit the fire. "One of us should take watch," Matthew said after they'd eaten, "just in case." "I'll take first shift," Catherine volunteered. "I'm not tired yet." Matthew hesitated. "You sure?" "I'm sure." She patted the derringer hidden in her skirt pocket. "I'll wake you in a few hours." With a nod, Matthew stretched out on the bed, his gun belt within easy reach. Catherine sat by the window, peering out at the rain-soaked night, her thoughts churning like the storm clouds overhead. She must have dozed off despite her best intentions, for the next thing she knew, Matthew was gently shaking her shoulder. "Catherine," he whispered, "someone's coming." Instantly alert, she straightened, reaching for her gun. Outside, the rain had stopped and dawn was breaking, casting long shadows across the clearing in front of the cabin. Through the window, she could see riders approaching, at least 6 of them. "Get behind me," Matthew ordered, drawing his Colt. "If things go south, there's a trapdoor under the bed." "Root cellar, hide there." Before Catherine could protest, the cabin door burst open. Jackson Reeves stood framed in the doorway, a smoking revolver in his hand and a cruel smile on his scarred face. "Morning, Keller," he drawled. "Hope we didn't wake you." Matthew's gun was steady, aimed at Jackson's heart. "How'd you find us?" "Like I said, little birds sing." Jackson stepped into the cabin, his men filing in behind him. "Peters and his boys work for me. Soon as they spotted you on the road, they sent word." Catherine's stomach dropped. "They'd walked right into a trap." "What do you want, Jackson?" Matthew asked, his voice dangerously calm. "Same thing as before, information." Jackson's eyes flicked to Catherine. "But now I've got better leverage." Matthew's jaw tightened. "Touch her and it's the last thing you'll do." Jackson laughed. "Big words for a man who's outnumbered 6-1. He gestured to one of his men. "Search the place, find anything useful." As the man moved toward their saddlebags, Matthew's finger tightened on the trigger. "Don't." The tension in the room was palpable, a powder keg waiting for a spark. Catherine held her breath, keenly aware that any sudden movement could unleash bloodshed. Surprisingly, it was Jackson who diffused the situation. "Stand down, boys," he ordered. "We're not here to kill anyone, not yet anyway." He pulled out a chair and sat, motioning for Matthew to do the same. After a moment's hesitation, Matthew lowered his gun slightly but remained standing. "Here's how this is gonna go," Jackson said, leaning forward. "You're going to tell me exactly what you know about the Blackwell's plans. In exchange, I don't put a bullet in your pretty lady friend." "I don't know anything about their plans," Matthew replied steadily. Jackson's smile turned predatory. "Don't lie to me, Keller. You were a ranger. You've been tracking them for months. You know something." Matthew's eyes narrowed. "If I knew where they were or what they were planning, do you think I'd be holed up in this cabin?" For a tense moment, Jackson studied him, as if trying to gauge his truthfulness. Finally, he nodded. "Fair point, but you know something, or you wouldn't be here." "All I know is they hit a supply wagon near Willow Creek yesterday. Same information Peters gave us." Jackson considered this. "And why are you so interested in the Blackwells? This about your brother?" "You know it is," Matthew replied, a dangerous edge to his voice. "Well, here's the thing, Keller," Jackson said, standing. The Blackwells and I have a business arrangement. They stay out of my territory, I stay out of theirs. We share information, split profits on certain ventures. He walked closer, stopping just out of arm's reach. So you hunting them? That's bad for business. I don't care about your business, Matthew growled. No, but you care about her, Jackson replied, nodding toward Catherine. So here's my offer. You stop chasing the Blackwells and I let you both walk away. Keep pursuing them and well. He let the threat hang in the air. Catherine stepped forward. We're not afraid of you. Jackson's gaze shifted to her, surprise and amusement mingling in his expression. Got spirit, doesn't she? I can see why you like her, Keller. Your offer is noted, Matthew said coldly. Now get out. Jackson laughed. You're in no position to give orders. Nevertheless, he moved toward the door, signaling his men to follow. Think about what I said. You've got till sundown tomorrow to decide. We'll be waiting in Willow Creek. After they left, Catherine released a shaky breath. What now? Matthew holstered his weapon, his expression dark. Now we change our plans. While Matthew scouted the area to ensure Jackson and his men had truly departed, Catherine reorganized their supplies, preparing for whatever came next. Her mind raced with possibilities, none of them particularly appealing. If they continued pursuing the Blackwells, they risked confrontation with both the gang and Jackson's men. If they abandoned their quest, justice for Matthew's brother and her parents would remain elusive. When Matthew returned, his face was grim. They're gone, but they left a man watching the trail. We won't be able to go directly to Willow Creek. So we take another route, Catherine suggested. Matthew nodded. There's a path through the hills. Longer, rougher terrain, but it'll bring us to the north side of town. We can slip in unnoticed. And then what? Jackson will still be looking for us. I have a friend in Willow Creek, Matthew explained, gathering his gear. Former ranger named Cooper. If anyone knows where the Blackwells might be hiding, it's him. They set out within the hour, leaving the cabin behind and taking the steep, rocky path that wound through the hills. The going was slow, with sections so narrow they had to dismount and lead the horses on foot. By midday, dark clouds had gathered again, threatening another downpour. There's a cave up ahead, Matthew called over his shoulder as fat raindrops began to fall. We can wait out the worst of it there. The cave was shallow but dry, offering enough space for them and the horses. As rain lashed the landscape outside, Catherine and Matthew huddled near the entrance, sharing jerky and the last of their biscuits. I'm sorry I got you into this, Matthew said suddenly. I should have left you in salvation. Catherine shook her head. You didn't get me into anything. I chose to come. Still, he insisted, this isn't your fight, isn't it? Catherine's voice rose slightly. Those men burned my home, took everything I had. If that's not my fight, I don't know what is. Matthew studied her face, his blue eyes softening. You're remarkable, you know that. Most people would have broken by now. Catherine looked away, uncomfortable with the praise. I'm not remarkable, just stubborn. A small smile tugged at Matthew's lips. Stubborn is good. Stubborn keeps you going when everything else says to stop. Something in his tone made Catherine glance up. In the dim light of the cave, with rain creating a curtain at the entrance, Matthew's face seemed different, less guarded, more open. She became acutely aware of how close they were sitting, their shoulders nearly touching. Matthew, she began, unsure what she wanted to say but feeling the need to say something. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face with gentle fingers. I keep thinking about what Jackson said about why I care so much, and he's right in a way, I do care. More than I should, considering we've only known each other a few days. Catherine's heart fluttered in her chest. I care too, she admitted softly. For a moment, it seemed as though he might kiss her. But then, with visible effort, Matthew pulled back, clearing his throat. We should rest while we can. It's still a long way to Willow Creek. The moment broken, Catherine nodded, trying to ignore the pang of disappointment that coursed through her. She settled back against the cave wall, closing her eyes, though sleep seemed unlikely with her thoughts in such turmoil. When the rain finally stopped, they continued their journey, the atmosphere between them charged with unspoken words and feelings. By nightfall, they could see the distant lights of Willow Creek twinkling in the valley below. We'll make camp here, Matthew decided. Enter town at first light when there are enough people about that we won't stand out. They set up a small, fireless camp, eating cold rations and speaking little. The night was clear, stars scattered across the velvet sky like diamonds on black cloth. Despite the beauty, tension hung in the air both from their dangerous mission and the growing attraction neither seemed willing to acknowledge. As Catherine prepared her bedroll, Matthew touched her arm lightly. "Catherine, about earlier, don't," she interrupted. "We have more important things to focus on right now." He nodded, though his eyes held a promise that the conversation wasn't over, merely postponed. "Get some rest, tomorrow won't be easy." Dawn broke misty and cool. They ate quickly, packed their gear, and descended toward Willow Creek, careful to stay among the trees as long as possible. The town was larger than Salvation, with several streets of businesses, a train station, and numerous houses scattered around the perimeter. "Cooper lives on the north edge of town," Matthew explained as they approached. "We'll stable the horses at the livery on this side and go to him on foot, less conspicuous that way." The livery stable was run by an elderly man who asked no questions when they paid for a day's boarding. From there, they walked through the awakening town, Matthew leading the way through back alleys and side streets to avoid the main thoroughfare. Cooper's house was a modest clapboard structure with a small porch and a well-kept garden. Matthew knocked in a specific pattern 3 quick raps followed by 2 slower ones. The door opened to reveal a tall, lean man with graying hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He took one look at Matthew and sighed. "I was wondering when you'd show up." "Good to see you too, Coop," Matthew replied with a half smile. Cooper's gaze shifted to Catherine. "And you brought company, interesting." "This is Catherine Porter," Matthew introduced. "Catherine, this is James Cooper, the best tracker the Rangers ever had." Cooper stepped back, gesturing them inside. "Better come in before someone spots you. Town's crawling with marshals and bounty hunters, not to mention Jackson Reeves and his boys." Once inside, Cooper offered them coffee and listened intently as Matthew explained their situation. "So Jackson gave you an ultimatum," Cooper mused, stroking his chin. "That complicates things. We need to find the Blackwells before sundown," Catherine said. "Any idea where they might be?" Cooper leaned back in his chair. "After they hit that supply wagon, they split up. Most headed south, but 3 of them, including Silas Blackwell himself, stayed in the area. Word is they're planning something bigger." "The railroad payroll," Matthew guessed. Cooper nodded. "Arrives tomorrow on the noon train." "Heavy guard, but not impossible for someone like Silas to overcome, especially if he has inside help." "And you think he does?" Catherine asked. "I know he does," Cooper replied grimly. "Station manager's brother owes Silas money, lots of it." Matthew stood pacing the small room. "So they'll hit the train tomorrow. That gives us today to find them before Jackson's deadline." "They're holed up at the old Wilson place," Cooper said. "About 2 miles east of town. Abandoned farm with a barn and root cellar. Good defensive position." Catherine exchanged a glance with Matthew. 3 Blackwell gang members, including their leader, against the 2 of them. The odds weren't favorable. "We can't go in guns blazing," Matthew said, voicing her thoughts. "We'd need a plan." "And help," Cooper added. "Which is why I sent for Marshal Davis this morning when I heard you were in town." Matthew's expression darkened. "Davis? Coop, you know my history with him." "I know you left the Rangers on bad terms," Cooper interrupted. "But Davis is a good man, and he wants the Blackwells as badly as you do. This could be a chance to make things right." Before Matthew could respond, a knock sounded at the door. Cooper checked the window before opening it, revealing a broad-shouldered man in a marshal's coat, a silver star pinned to his chest. "Cooper," the man acknowledged before his gaze landed on Matthew. His eyes widened slightly. "Keller, been a while." "Marshal," Matthew replied stiffly. Marshal Davis entered, removing his hat to reveal close-cropped gray hair. His weathered face was impassive as he took in Catherine. "Madam." Cooper quickly made introductions and explained the situation. Davis listened without interruption, his expression giving away nothing. "So," he said when Cooper finished, "you believe the Blackwells are at the Wilson place, planning to rob the payroll train tomorrow?" "Yes, sir," Cooper confirmed. Davis turned to Matthew. "And you're after them because of your brother." "And because they burned Miss Porter's home," Matthew added. "They've left a trail of destruction across 3 counties. Someone needs to stop them." "Someone with a badge," Davis countered. "Not a vigilante." Matthew's jaw tightened. "I'm not looking for revenge, Marshal, just justice." Davis studied him for a long moment before sighing. "I've got 4 deputies. With you 2 and Cooper, that makes 7 against 3, decent odds if your information is correct." Hope flared in Catherine's chest. "You'll help us?" "I'll help bring criminals to justice," Davis clarified. "Whether that satisfies your personal vendettas is not my concern." It wasn't the ringing endorsement Catherine had hoped for, but it was something. Matthew seemed to feel the same, for he extended his hand to Davis. "Thank you, Marshal." Davis shook it briefly. "Don't thank me yet, we still have to catch them." They spent the next hour planning their approach. The Wilson farm had only 2 structures, a dilapidated house and a more solid barn where the Blackwells were likely staying. The property was surrounded by open fields, making a stealthy approach difficult. "We'll go at dusk," Davis decided. "Less visibility for them, better cover for us. Cooper and I will take 2 men and approach from the west. Keller, you and Miss Porter will circle around from the east with my other deputies." "I should go with you," Matthew argued. "I know Silas Blackwell better than anyone." Davis shook his head. "That's precisely why you shouldn't. Your personal connection makes you unpredictable." Though Matthew clearly wanted to protest further, he nodded reluctantly. "Fine, east approach it is." As they finalized details, Catherine couldn't help but notice the tension between Matthew and the marshal. There was history there beyond what Cooper had alluded to. But now wasn't the time to ask about it. By late afternoon, they were ready. Davis's deputies, hard-eyed men with experienced hands, joined them at Cooper's house, bringing extra weapons and ammunition. Catherine was given a Winchester rifle to complement her Derringer, while Matthew checked and rechecked his Colt and a second pistol Cooper had provided. "You sure about this?" Matthew asked Catherine quietly as they prepared to leave. "It's not too late to stay behind." Catherine chambered around in the Winchester with practiced ease. "I'm sure." The ride to the Wilson farm was tense and silent. As planned, they split into 2 groups, circling wide to approach from different directions. The sun was setting as Catherine, Matthew, and 2 deputies named Harris and Jenkins reached their position at the edge of the trees east of the property. The farm looked peaceful in the fading light, an old house with broken windows, a weathered barn with its door partially open, and overgrown fields stretching in all directions. If not for the 3 horses hitched outside the barn, it would have appeared abandoned. "See anything?" Catherine whispered, squinting through the twilight. Matthew shook his head. "No movement, but they're in there." Harris, a stocky man with a thick mustache, checked his pocket watch. "Almost time. Marshall should be in position by now." The plan was simple. At precisely 7 o'clock, both teams would advance on the barn surrounding it before announcing themselves. If the Blackwells surrendered, they'd be taken alive. If not, "It's time," Jenkins said softly. Matthew nodded, drawing his Colt. "Stay behind me," he murmured to Catherine. "And if shooting starts, find cover immediately." They moved forward through the tall grass, weapons ready, eyes scanning for any sign of danger. 50 yards, 40, 30. The barn loomed larger with each step, its dark interior revealing nothing of what waited within. 20 yards out, a flicker of movement caught Catherine's eye, a shadow at one of the barn's broken windows. "Matthew," she began, but her warning came too late. A rifle barrel protruded from the window, followed by a muzzle flash and the crack of gunfire. Jenkins cried out, clutching his shoulder as he fell. "Take cover," Matthew shouted, pulling Catherine behind an old water trough as bullets splintered the wood around them. From the west side of the property, more gunfire erupted as Davis and his men returned fire. The peaceful evening dissolved into chaos, the air filled with smoke and the deafening sound of battle. Harris dragged the wounded Jenkins toward them, pressing a bandana to the man's bleeding shoulder. "They were waiting for us." "Someone tipped them off," Matthew growled, popping up to fire 2 quick shots toward the barn before ducking back down. Catherine's heart pounded in her ears as she gripped the Winchester, waiting for an opportunity to use it. She'd fired at targets and game before, but never at another human being. The prospect terrified and sickened her, yet she knew she might have no choice. "We need to get to the house," Matthew decided, gesturing to the structure about 30 yards to their right. "Better cover, better angle." Harris nodded. "I'll cover you. Get Jenkins to safety first." Matthew turned to Catherine. "When I say go, run for the house. Don't stop, don't look back," she nodded, gathering herself. Jenkins was pale but conscious, leaning heavily on Matthew's shoulder. "Go." Harris shouted, standing to fire rapidly at the barn. Catherine ran, heart in her throat, expecting at any moment to feel the burning impact of a bullet. Matthew followed with Jenkins, moving as quickly as the injured man allowed. They reached the house's sagging porch just as Harris joined them, diving through the doorway as bullets thudded into the wooden frame behind him. Inside, the house was dusty and abandoned, furniture long since removed. They positioned Jenkins against an interior wall where he'd be safest from stray bullets. "Stay with him," Matthew told Catherine. "Harris and I will try to get a better angle on the barn." Before she could protest, they were gone, moving toward the back of the house. Catherine checked Jenkins's wound. The bullet had gone through his shoulder, missing bone but leaving a nasty hole that bled steadily. She tore strips from her petticoat to bandage it as best she could. "Thank you, miss," Jenkins said through gritted teeth. "You're mighty brave to be out here." Catherine managed a tight smile. Not brave, just stubborn, as Mr. Keller would say. Outside, the gunfire had become more sporadic. Catherine could hear shouting Davis calling for the Blackwells to surrender, answered by defiant curses from within the barn. Suddenly, the back door of the house burst open. Catherine whirled, raising her rifle, only to find Matthew and Harris returning. "They're making a break for it," Matthew explained breathlessly. "Two of them mounted up and rode out the back of the barn. Davis and his men are in pursuit." "What about the third?" Catherine asked, still inside, providing covering fire. Matthew checked his ammunition. "It's Sila's. I saw him through my spyglass." Catherine's blood ran cold. Sila's Blackwell, the man who had led the raid on her home, who had killed Matthew's brother, was cornered just yards away. "What's the plan?" Harris asked, reloading his revolver. Matthew's expression was determined. "We end this." Before Harris could respond, more gunfire erupted from outside. A bullet shattered one of the few remaining windows, showering them with glass. Jenkins groaned as Catherine shielded him with her body. "He's moving," Harris shouted, peering carefully around the window frame, "heading for the horses." Matthew was already moving, darting through the front door with Harris close behind. Catherine hesitated only a moment before following, leaving Jenkins with the Derringer for protection. Outside, dusk had given way to near darkness, the scene illuminated only by muzzle flashes and the faint glow of a rising moon. Catherine could make out a figure running from the barn toward the hitching post where one horse remained. "Sila's Blackwell." Matthew's voice rang out across the yard. "It's over." The figure turned, firing wildly in their direction. Matthew returned fire with deadly precision, and the man stumbled but kept moving. "Drop your weapon," Harris called, advancing cautiously. Instead, Blackwell fired again. The bullet caught Harris in the leg, dropping him to the ground with a cry of pain. Matthew continued forward, exchanging shots with Blackwell as they circled the yard. Catherine moved to help Harris, pulling him behind an old wagon for cover. "Stay down," she urged, before turning her attention back to the deadly dance unfolding before her. Matthew and Blackwell were now just yards apart, both seeking cover behind sparse obstacles, Matthew behind a water barrel, Blackwell behind the hitching post. The horse had broken free in the chaos, leaving the gang leader with no escape route. "You killed my brother," Matthew called out, his voice raw with emotion. "Thomas Keller, remember him?" "I've killed a lot of men," Blackwell replied with a harsh laugh. "Can't expect me to remember them all." Matthew's face hardened. "Drop your gun and face justice or die where you stand. Your choice." "I choose option 3, Blackwell snarled, suddenly lunging toward Catherine and Harris. Everything happened in a blur. Blackwell fired, the bullet whizzing past Catherine's ear. She raised the Winchester, her finger tightening on the trigger, but before she could fire, Matthew stepped into Blackwell's path. 2 shots rang out almost simultaneously. Matthew staggered but remained standing. Blackwell wasn't as fortunate. He crumpled to the ground, clutching his chest. "Matthew," Catherine cried, rushing to him as he sank to one knee. "I'm all right," he gasped, though blood was spreading across his left side. "Check Blackwell, make sure he's—" Catherine approached the fallen outlaw cautiously, rifle ready. But there was no need for caution. Silas Blackwell stared sightlessly at the darkening sky, a red stain spreading across his shirt. "He's dead," she confirmed, returning to Matthew's side. By this time, Davis and his remaining deputy had returned, having lost the trail of the other 2 Blackwells in the darkness. "Keller," Davis called, running toward them. "What happened?" "Blackwell's dead," Matthew replied through clenched teeth, allowing Catherine to examine his wound. "Harris and Jenkins are wounded. The other 2 got away." Davis surveyed the scene grimly. "We'll get them. They won't get far." He knelt beside Matthew. "How bad is it?" "Bullet grazed my ribs." Matthew winced as Catherine pressed a cloth to the bleeding gash. "Nothing vital hit." Relief washed over Catherine. The wound was painful but not life-threatening, a few inches to the right, and the outcome would have been very different. "We need to get everyone back to town," Davis decided. "Doc Bennett can tend to the wounded." As they prepared to leave, Catherine couldn't help but look back at Blackwell's body, now being wrapped in a blanket by Davis's deputy. The man who had destroyed her home, who had taken so much from her and from Matthew, was gone. Yet the victory felt hollow somehow, tainted by the violence that had brought it about. "You all right?" Matthew asked softly, noticing her expression. Catherine nodded slowly. "I thought I'd feel, I don't know, relieved, satisfied, but I just feel empty." Matthew's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "Vengeance doesn't fill the holes they leave in our lives, but maybe justice can help us move forward." Her eyes met his, finding unexpected warmth and understanding there. "And what now? Where do we go from here?" Before Matthew could answer, Davis approached. "Wagon's ready. Let's get you all back to town." The return to Willow Creek was slow and painful, with 3 wounded men jolting over every rut and stone in the road. By the time they reached town, Matthew's face was drawn with pain, though he refused to complain. Doc Bennett's surgery was lit up despite the late hour, the elderly physician apparently accustomed to receiving patients at all times. He quickly organized the treatment of the wounded, prioritizing Jenkins with his more serious shoulder wound. Catherine stayed by Matthew's side as the doctor cleaned and bandaged his injury, wincing in sympathy at each flinch and hiss of pain. "You're lucky," Bennett told Matthew as he tied off the bandage. "Another inch and we'd be having a very different conversation." "I've always been lucky," Matthew replied with a weak smile, his eyes finding Catherine's. "Especially lately." The doctor prescribed rest and gave Matthew a small bottle of laudanum for the pain. "No riding for at least a week," he instructed sternly. "That wound needs time to heal properly." Outside the surgery, Davis was waiting. "Cooper's arranged rooms for you at the hotel," he told them. "We can talk more tomorrow after you've rested." "What about Jackson Reeves?" Catherine asked. "His deadline is no longer a concern," Davis interrupted. "Reeves and his men left town about an hour ago, heading south in a hurry. Seems they got word that the remaining Blackwells were caught by a ranger patrol near the border." Matthew's eyebrows rose. "All of them?" Davis nodded. "All 6 surviving members. Seems your actions here flushed them out right into a ranger ambush." He almost smiled. Sometimes justice works in mysterious ways. Relief flooded through Catherine. It was over, truly over. The Blackwells would face proper justice for their crimes, and Jackson Reeves was no longer a threat. The hotel was a 2-story building on the main street, cleaner and more modern than the inn in Salvation had been. Cooper had secured adjoining rooms for Catherine and Matthew with a connecting door between them. "I'll check on you in the morning," Cooper told them as he left them at their doors. "Get some rest. You've both earned it." Once alone in her room, Catherine sank onto the bed, the events of the day catching up with her all at once. She was physically exhausted, emotionally drained, and yet strangely peaceful. For the first time since her home had burned, she felt the tight knot of grief and anger in her chest begin to loosen. A soft knock at the connecting door roused her. "Catherine," Matthew's voice called. "Are you awake?" She crossed to the door and opened it. Matthew stood there, his shirt off, fresh bandages wrapped around his torso. Despite his injury, he looked stronger than she'd expected. "I wanted to make sure you were all right," he said. "Today was a lot," Catherine nodded. "I'm fine, better than you, I'd wager." A small smile curved his lips. "I've had worse." An awkward silence fell between them, filled with unspoken words and lingering glances. "Matthew," Catherine began at the same time he said, "Catherine." They both laughed, the tension breaking slightly. "Ladies first," Matthew offered. Catherine took a deep breath. "I was just going to say thank you for everything, for helping me when you found me at my homestead, for bringing me along on your quest, for stepping in front of that bullet today." Matthew's eyes softened. "I'd do it again in a heartbeat." "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. He stepped closer, his hand coming up to gently touch her cheek. "Because in just a few days, you've become more important to me than I ever thought possible." Catherine's heart fluttered in her chest. Matthew, whatever she might have said was lost as he leaned down, pressing his lips to hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. For a moment she was too surprised to respond, but then her arms wound around his neck, careful of his injury as she returned the kiss with equal tenderness. When they finally broke apart, Matthew rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since that moment in the cave," he admitted. Catherine smiled. "I've wanted you to." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "What happens now is up to you, Catherine." "I meant what I said about moving forward. The past is settled. The future—" His voice trailed off, uncharacteristically uncertain. "The future is ours to decide," she finished for him, her decision already made. The following morning, they met with Marshal Davis and Cooper for breakfast. Davis, much to Catherine's surprise, was significantly warmer toward Matthew than he had been the previous day. "I owe you an apology, Keller," he said as they ate. "I was wrong about your motives. Cooper here set me straight." Matthew raised an eyebrow at his friend, who shrugged innocently. "Just told him the truth," Cooper said. "That you weren't after vengeance so much as justice, and that you've been tracking the Blackwells not just for your brother but for all their victims." Davis nodded. "The Rangers could use men like you again if you're ever interested in coming back." Matthew's hand found Catherine's under the table. "Thank you, Marshal, but I think my path lies elsewhere now." As they finished breakfast, Cooper pulled Matthew aside for a private conversation while Catherine remained with Davis. "He's a good man," the Marshal told her. "One of the best I've known, despite our differences in the past." "I know," Catherine replied simply. When Matthew returned, there was a new light in his eyes. "Cooper's offered me a job," he explained. "He's starting a freight company, running supplies between Willow Creek and the settlements to the north. Needs someone to manage security and occasionally drive the wagons." "That sounds perfect for you," Catherine said, genuinely pleased. Matthew nodded. "It would mean staying in Willow Creek, at least for a while." His gaze held a question. Before she could respond, Davis cleared his throat. "Miss Porter, I understand you have experience working in a dress shop." Surprised, Catherine nodded. "Briefly in Salvation." "My wife owns the millinery here in town," Davis explained. "She's been looking for help. If you're interested, the position is yours." Catherine looked between the two men, suddenly understanding the coordination that had taken place. "You planned this." Matthew had the grace to look slightly abashed. "We discussed possibilities. The decision is entirely yours." For a moment, Catherine considered her options. She could return to Salvation, where Mrs. Harrington would surely welcome her back. She could continue to San Francisco to find her aunt. Or she could stay in Willow Creek, building a new life alongside Matthew. When she looked at him, at the hope and affection in his blue eyes, the choice was simple. "I think I'd like to meet your wife, Marshal," she said with a smile, "and discuss this position." The relief and joy on Matthew's face was all the confirmation she needed that she'd made the right decision. In the weeks that followed, Catherine and Matthew settled into life in Willow Creek. She worked at Davis Millinery, discovering a talent for design that Mrs. Davis, a plump, cheerful woman named Beatrice, encouraged wholeheartedly. Matthew divided his time between helping Cooper establish his freight business and overseeing the construction of a small house on the outskirts of town, on land Cooper had included as part of his employment offer. Their courtship progressed with a mix of traditional propriety and the deeper understanding that came from having faced danger together. They attended church socials and town dances, enjoyed quiet dinners at the hotel restaurant, and spent evenings on the porch of Cooper's house, where Matthew was staying until his own home was complete, talking about everything and nothing. As autumn painted the countryside in gold and crimson, Matthew took Catherine riding to see the progress on the house. It was a modest structure, but solid and well-built, with a wide porch and large windows to catch the morning light. "What do you think?" he asked as they dismounted. "Cooper's men have done good work." Catherine walked around the exterior, admiring the craftsmanship. "It's beautiful, Matthew. You must be excited to move in." "I am," he agreed, taking her hand and leading her inside. The interior was still unfinished, bare wooden floors, unpainted walls, and only the most basic furniture in place. But Catherine could see the potential: the large hearth that would warm the main room, the kitchen area with space for a proper stove, the two bedrooms separated by a short hallway. "This could be a wonderful home," she said sincerely. Matthew's expression grew serious. "That's what I'm hoping." He took both her hands in his. "Catherine, these past weeks have been the happiest of my life, despite everything we went through to get here. You've brought light back into my world when I thought it would stay dark forever." Catherine's heart began to race as she realized where this conversation was heading. "I know it hasn't been long," Matthew continued, "but when you know something is right, time doesn't seem to matter much." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I was going to wait, make this more formal, but standing here in this house, our house, if you want it to be, I can't wait any longer." He opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant gold ring set with a small diamond. "Catherine Porter, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears welled in Catherine's eyes as emotion overwhelmed her. All her life, she'd been taught to be strong, to hold back tears, to face hardship with a stiff upper lip. But in this moment, with Matthew looking at her with such love and hope, she couldn't hold them back. "Yes," she whispered as the first tear spilled down her cheek. "Yes, I will." Matthew slipped the ring onto her finger, then gently wiped away each tear with his thumb, his touch tender and reverent. "Don't hide these," he murmured. "Not from me, never from me." Catherine laughed through her tears. "I thought tears were a sign of weakness." "No," Matthew replied, drawing her into his arms. "They're a sign that you feel deeply. And I love that about you, how deeply you feel, how fiercely you love." Their lips met in a kiss that sealed their promise, standing in the unfinished house that would soon be their home, surrounded by the echoes of their past and the whispered possibilities of their future. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Willow Creek, with Cooper standing as Matthew's best man and Beatrice Davis as Catherine's matron of honor. The entire town turned out for the celebration, welcoming Catherine fully into their community and celebrating the happiness she and Matthew had found together. By Christmas, their house was complete, decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons for the holiday. Catherine had established herself as not just a shop assistant, but a talented designer, with ladies from as far as 20 miles away coming to Davis Millinery specifically to purchase her creations. Matthew's work with Cooper's Freight Company was thriving, their reputation for reliable and secure transport bringing in more business than they could handle. There was talk of expanding in the spring, perhaps adding another wagon and team to their fleet. On Christmas Eve, as snow fell softly outside their window, Matthew and Catherine sat before the fire in their new home, content in each other's company. "I have something for you," Matthew said, reaching beneath the small tree they'd decorated. "An early Christmas gift." Catherine accepted the package, wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its pages blank and waiting. "For our story," Matthew explained, "so we never forget how we got here and so we can keep writing it together." Catherine's eyes glistened with tears, happy ones, which she no longer tried to hide. "It's perfect," she said, leaning in to kiss him. "And I have something for you too." She placed his hand gently on her stomach, watching as understanding dawned in his eyes. "Are you sure?" He whispered, joy and wonder spreading across his face. Catherine nodded. "Doc Bennett confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have a baby, Matthew, in the summer." Matthew gathered her in his arms, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "A family," he murmured against her hair. "Our family." As they held each other before the crackling fire, with snow falling gently outside and the promise of new life growing within, Catherine thought about the journey that had brought them here, from ashes and grief to love and hope, from holding back tears to letting them fall freely, from strangers to partners in every sense of the word. Life in the West would never be easy. There would always be challenges, hardships, and trials to face. But they would face them together, writing their story day by day, page by page, tear by joyful tear. And that, Catherine knew with absolute certainty, was more than enough. The following summer, as wildflowers painted the Texas hillsides in vibrant colors, Catherine gave birth to a healthy baby girl they named Elizabeth, after Matthew's mother. Cooper, who had become like family to them both, paced outside with Matthew during the delivery, more nervous than the expectant father himself. When the midwife finally allowed Matthew into the bedroom, he found Catherine propped up against pillows, their tiny daughter cradled in her arms. The sight stole his breath away. "Come meet your daughter," Catherine said softly, her face glowing despite her exhaustion. Matthew approached almost reverently, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. When Catherine placed Elizabeth in his arms, his hands, so capable with reins and guns, trembled slightly as they adjusted to hold something so precious and small. "She's perfect," he whispered, counting tiny fingers and toes, marveling at the wisp of dark hair that already showed signs of Catherine's auburn highlights. Just like her mother. Life settled into a new rhythm after Elizabeth's birth. Catherine continued her design work, though now she did most of it from home, with occasional visits to the shop when Beatrice could mind the baby. Matthew's freight business with Cooper expanded to 3 wagons, requiring him to hire additional drivers. Though he sometimes needed to accompany particularly valuable shipments, he arranged his schedule to be home as much as possible. Their house grew too, with the addition of a proper nursery and an expanded kitchen where Catherine experimented with recipes passed down from both their families. The garden she planted flourished, providing fresh vegetables in summer and preserves for winter. When Elizabeth was nearly 2, Matthew returned from a trip to Austin with news that would once again change their lives. "The governor has appointed a new circuit judge for this region," he told Catherine as they sat on their porch after putting Elizabeth to bed. "Man named Harrison Wells. He's looking for deputies to help maintain order and enforce his rulings." Catherine set down her sewing. And he's offered me a position," Matthew said. "Similar to a marshal, but with a regular circuit and schedule. It would mean less time on the road than the freight business, more time at home. Better pay too." "You'd be back in law enforcement," Catherine observed, studying his expression. "Is that something you want?" Matthew reached for her hand. "When I left the Rangers, I was angry, bitter. I thought justice could only be served my way." He smiled ruefully. "I was wrong about a lot of things back then. And now I understand that true justice needs good people working within the system, not outside it." He squeezed her hand. "But this decision affects all of us. You, me, Elizabeth, our future." Catherine considered his words. She'd never forgotten the determined man who'd ridden up to her burned homestead, nor the righteous anger that had driven him to hunt down the Blackwells. But she'd also witnessed his growth, his tempering of that anger into something more constructive. "I think you'd be wonderful at it," she said finally, "and I think your father and brother would be proud." Matthew's eyes brightened at the mention of his family. "You think so? I know so." She leaned over to kiss him softly. "As am I." With Catherine's blessing, Matthew accepted Judge Wells's offer. His new position brought stability and respect, and though it occasionally took him away from home for short periods, the regular schedule allowed him to be present for the important moments in their lives. Elizabeth grew from a toddler to a precocious child with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit. When she was 4, she gained a brother, Thomas Cooper Keller, named for Matthew's brother and their dear friend. Cooper himself remained a bachelor, though there were rumors of a courtship with the widow who ran the telegram office. He was a frequent visitor to the Keller home, delighting the children with stories of his ranger days, carefully edited for young ears, and bringing them small treasures from his travels. As the years passed, Willow Creek grew from a small town to a prosperous community. The railroad brought new opportunities, and Catherine's designs became known throughout the region, with orders coming in from as far as Dallas and San Antonio. Matthew's reputation as a fair but firm deputy judge earned him the respect of honest citizens and the wariness of those with less honorable intentions. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Matthew surprised Catherine with a trip back to the site of her old homestead near Salvation. The journey was bittersweet. The children left in Cooper and Beatrice's care for the week. The land had been reclaimed by nature, grass and wildflowers covering what had once been the cabin and barn. Only the stone foundation remained visible, a ghost of the life Catherine had once known. They stood together in the late afternoon sun, Matthew's arm around Catherine's waist as she surveyed what had once been her home. "It's strange," she said softly. "I can still see it in my mind the way it was before the fire, but it feels like someone else's memory now." Matthew nodded. "Time changes how we see the past, softens some edges, sharpens others." Catherine leaned into him. "If they hadn't burned it, if you hadn't found me here, everything would be different. Do you ever regret it?" Matthew asked carefully, "the path your life took?" Catherine turned to face him, her hands coming up to frame his face. In the decade they'd been together, silver had begun to thread through his dark hair at the temples, and fine lines had formed at the corners of his eyes, evidence of both laughter and concern. To Catherine, he had never been more handsome. "Not for a moment," she said with absolute conviction. "The loss was painful, yes, but what I gained you, our children, our life together, I wouldn't trade for anything." As the sun began to set, painting the Texas sky in dramatic oranges and purples, Matthew pulled Catherine close. "Remember what I told you that first day, about tears?" Catherine smiled at the memory. "That out here, only the land remembers them." "I was only half right," Matthew said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "The land remembers, but so do we. Every tear, every joy, every moment that brought us here, they are all part of our story." "A story that's still being written," Catherine added, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. As twilight embraced the land, they made their way back to the wagon that would take them to Salvation for the night, before returning home to Willow Creek and their children the following day. Catherine cast one last glance at her former homestead, silently thanking it for the girl she had been and the woman she had become. The land would indeed remember her tears, the ones she had fought to hold back and the ones Matthew had gently wiped away. But more importantly, it would remember their love, a love forged in fire and loss, tempered by time and trust, and made stronger with each passing day. And as stars began to appear in the vast Texas sky, Catherine Porter Keller knew with absolute certainty that the best chapters of their story were yet to be written.